My name is Florian. I'm here today to tell you about how we might use bicycle urbanism to create our future cities. But let me ask you a question first. Who of you came by bicycle tonight, or who of you is using the bicycle on a regular basis? Please raise your hand if you do so. Okay, so are we decided to estimate the cycling population in here? I would estimate that it's somewhere between 15, somewhere around 15%. So this is more than we have in Vienna. This is unusually high for Vienna. I think that this is only unusually high because we still only use our bicycles to adapt to a city, but not use the bicycle to create our cities. So I will not tell you today why the bicycle is smart, efficient, direct, cheap, and whatever else benefits it has. Such discourse is what I consider bicycle 1.0, and you all know that. Today I will talk about bicycle 2.0, which is building a city with and for the bicycle, what I call bicycle urbanism. So what did me make believe in the transformative power of the bicycle? We live in urban ecologies. And these are open systems with fluxes of energy and matter nourished by a globalized hinterland. Our urban lives, our consumption, our nutrition, and of course our mobility is the driving force behind these urban ecologies. This is what keeps the system in flux, so to say. Over the time, we have developed and adapted to different forms of mobility to be mobile in these cities and to have access to these marketplaces of opportunities. Walking, riding the backs of animals, sitting in mass public transport, and recently we adapted to a system of hypermobilization where the private passenger car is the dominating factor. So an increasing number of people is trying to get access to these urban marketplaces of opportunities. The International Transport Forum at the OECD estimates that from now until 2050, 400 trillion trips will be taking place in the world. So of those 400 trillion trips, 94% will be in urban areas and 14% will be taking place in transportation systems which are not in place yet. So there is a lot to do here, a lot more people will have to get mobilized. And the question is simply, how do we mobilize our urban populations in future? So I became entrenched with this question for the first time really when I was writing my thesis in ecology. I was looking into the life cycles of biofuels used for combustion engines in cars, and I compared them to conventional fuels. I compared energy, greenhouse gas, and carbon footprints. And of course, I also cycled to university, and one day I asked myself, why not comparing the bicycle to the other transportation scenarios? And I asked my supervisor, can't we include that? And he said, no, that would be off the scope of the study. And I said, okay, I accept it for now, but it still kept on interesting me. And I thought we have such a real great and important mobility challenge to face, so what are we doing about it to tackle that? So what are we really doing? The last 30 years we have used 1/3 of the non-renewable resources in this world. We have an energy use which is going for 25% to fuel the transportation systems. And by 2050, as we heard today, we will double the urban population. So my urban ecology background made me understand that we have a system which is kind of frozen in urban form. So the way we build our cities also defines the departure point to change the mobility systems. So if we really wanted to encounter the mobility challenge, we had to change something about the layout and the construction of our cities. So that's when I became interested in urbanism and the transportation issue of it. So from my experience in Copenhagen as an exchange student previously, I knew that the bicycle could also be used as a serious means of transport. So I was increasingly getting interested in using cycling as a strategy for urban mobility. So in early 2010, I went to China and got in contact with Smarter Than Car, which has been just founded at that time, and which was China's first cycling NGO. They lent a bicycle to me, and I could experience Beijing streets on my own with this bicycle. I was cycling 5-meter wide cycle tracks, Hutong back lanes where cars could not penetrate and only cycling was the way to get around. And I was cycling with small swarms of cyclists and cargo bike pilots. This was a very different experience to what I knew from Europe, and it was a totally different cycling experience, a totally different city for me. But they also told me another story. They told me the story that cycling in China was actually rapidly eroding. The once hailed bicycle kingdom was eroding, and the people started to cherish the car. So that was the contrary to what happened in Europe, what I knew from Europe, where people were cycling more and where cycling was becoming trendy and supported. So this was a fascinating context for me, and I decided to continue working with them. So I started to work as a researcher for STC or with STC on a pro bono basis, and we started to document Beijing's urban life around the bicycle, specifically because it was eroding at such a high rate. So you have to understand, in Beijing there is basically nothing what is not done on a bicycle. There is all kinds of urban functions happening from the bicycle. So you have everything transported, street cleaning happening from the bicycle. You have mobile kitchens, and you have like crazy stuff like dentists on a bicycle, or people selling birds, or different kinds of things. So this diversity and also the importance for the city was where we saw the relevance for documenting it and also researching it. So what we did was to survey these bicycle livelihoods, as we coined them, and to classify them. What we found was pop-up retail, transport delivery, crafts and services on a bicycle, and the sharing of personal mobility. What bicycle livelihoods do is that they provide urban services in a very spontaneous and adaptive way to the city. They are together creating fluid activity zones which react to a demand which is changing over time. And they are fine-grained economies which provide low barrier opportunity for people to make their living in a city. So that was where we saw the relevance for an urbanism discourse, but we also wanted to know more. So we knew that these were the remnants of a much more lively bicycle culture. So we started to look into the history of urban cycling in Beijing. So Beijing experienced what we call peak bicycle urbanism in the 80s. In 1986, you had a 58% mode share in Beijing. So 58% of all trips in the city were done with a bicycle. And Beijing had a population of 5.4 million people at that time. So that lets you estimate that we had about 3 million urban cyclists in Beijing, which is kind of a massive population using a bicycle. So that simply dwarfs the cycling populations of the well-known cycling cities of today in Europe. So Beijing truly was an urban cycling metropolis. So how did this work out? How did the people manage to get around on a bicycle? So here is two models of getting around and two models for urban traffic culture. To the left side, you see what we know as a European model. You have a very strict set of rules and you have delineated territories. To the right side, you see the Beijing's model of negotiated flow. There is loose territories and loose sets of rules, and there is less traffic lights or stop signs. So from an outside, this might look very chaotic and dysfunctional, but when you once give in to this swarm intelligence and ride with the flow, you actually experience that there is some validity to it. So these systems are differentiated by personal negotiation. The system of negotiated flow works that everybody is constantly negotiating with everybody else, and that's why they are also slowing down the traffic participants. So this is also making the system safe, because people feel unsafe and they are getting slow because of that. So they constantly negotiate, and there is less stopping and more direct ways, because people find a more direct way in this. So it's a highly efficient system also to use space. And of course, with 60% cyclists, it's also an amazing footprint. But what else happened in Beijing? In terms of urban life, we had unique bicycle cultures and a lot of urban life around the bicycle. Here you see an image of Tiananmen Square where people just go out on a weekend and taking a picnic, and you can see of how many of those people use the bicycle, how abundant the use was. There was a fashion movement around the bicycle. We had something like a Beijing bicycle chic already in the 80s. And of course, there was creativity and innovation around the bicycle. Here you see an image of a meeting of the Beijing Bicycle Innovators Club, and you can realize that none of the 3 bicycles pictured here is what you can buy in a shop. So mobility culture is something what has to be cultivated. It is not something here to stay or which can be created from top down. The unique example of Beijing's bicycle culture also shows that it can be rapidly lost. And here on this comparison you can see how the dominant mobility culture is changing your cityscape. So what can we take from this? In our time of hypermobility, we are searching for solutions for the future of urban mobility. So what about slowing down a little bit and looking into examples like the city of Beijing? What if we imagine that the bicycle will become the next dominant form of urban mobility? How would that be if the bicycle be a benchmark for our urban development, if we thought in terms of a bicycle urbanism? So there is bicycle urbanism strategies for many cities, and it's a valuable approach for cities which are facing especially 3 challenges. The challenge of mobilizing a growing population at a limited amount of space, the challenge of adapting transportation systems to such a high demand, and the challenge of reducing the footprints of urban mobility systems. And guess what? Vienna is one such city. So today I want to leave you with 3 proposals for bicycle urbanism in Vienna, and as urbanism is a very multidisciplinary field, I have 3 proposals for you, one for the discipline or the scale, let's say, from urban planning, one for community building, and one for urban visioning. So the first one is the urban planning scale. It is the idea to create zones for democratic flow in Vienna. So these would be zones where you take out all traffic regulations and where you make people really feel uncertain. So every traffic participant would be equal, and people would have to start negotiating and transacting in these places. So this will be places which will lead to an inclusion of people, of different traffic participants, and of course there will also be a new space created in the sense that there will be less cars parked and a more efficient use of this space. So we can also take in or put in new socio-ecological infrastructure in these spaces. The second idea is to introduce bicycle livelihoods 2.0 to Vienna. And I'm glad to work on a project currently where we are introducing or proposing pedal-powered mobile incubators for a community center in the 10th district in Vienna. So there's 2 types of incubators. The creative cultural incubator, which is fitted to provide capacity for media production, broadcasting, or acting and singing. And the second type, in green, of course, is the gardening incubator, which is providing storage for tools, but is also a vehicle to transport goods and to exchange natural resources like soil, plants, or organic matter. So these tools, they can create urban interaction and are a means to share culture. They will make possible that urban interventions take place and will therefore lead to more community building. And the third idea is to promote creative capital in urban cycling. The first half of this year, I was glad to work with the team at PlanSinn in Vienna to realize the Cycling Visionaries Awards. The program was geared to curate new ideas for for the future of urban cycling and to make them visible to the global cycling community. So it was an endeavor to share knowledge, to create shared knowledge. So there were many stories attached to this initiative of empowerment, sharing, and new inspiration. And what about if we took this idea on a more permanent basis and created an open source platform to foster ideas in urban cycling and in the way of bicycle urbanism, so to foster new innovation in bicycle urbanism? Vienna may therefore become a hub for urban cycling, and it will benefit Vienna, as there will be a lot of ideas coming to Vienna, but also catalyze ideas all over the world and empower people for their own agency, for their own cities. So what I encountered this year with working with the global cycling community was that the people have a very open and sharing mindset. And this is exactly where I see the breeding ground for a bicycle urbanism. So the promise of bicycle urbanism, to realize the promise of bicycle urbanism, we have to create the right conditions for this change to happen. I don't think that this is something what we can plan from top down. We rather have to let it happen. That is exactly also where bicycle urbanism and the City 2.0 come together. So I believe strongly in the bicycle as being a catalyst for urban agency. It is exactly this efficient simplicity of the bicycle what makes people come together. And when people are on the back of their bicycle transitioning in the city with each other, they are geared towards becoming agents for their own city. So the bicycle is a ready-to-use, very democratic tool at hand, which we can use to create a future city. And what I propose today is let's start thinking together in terms of bicycle urbanism to create a City 2.0. Thank you very much.